Hey, it's Liz D'Alto, and this is the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untamed the Wild Soul Woman is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. Welcome to episode number 137 of the Untamed the Wild Soul podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth D'Alto. Today's guest is one of my very favorite people to jam on all things spiritual, energetic, and metaphysical with. He's more well-read, studied, and articulated than most other humans I've ever met. And as you guys know, I know a lot of humans. He also has a way of putting things that when it hits your brain, it literally feels like a new pathway has been created. At least it feels that way for me, and I hope you get to have a similar experience as you listen to this awesome conversation with my good friend, Dr. Matt Kreinheder. We get into various aspects of the spiritual experience, how people make meaning out of things, integrating experiences, boundaries, the relationship between body, mind, spirit, and emotions. There is a ton of great information and tons of jewels in here, and you don't even have to dig for them. So enjoy this episode. I can't wait to see what you think. All the show notes will be at untameyourself.com/episode-137. And as always, if you want to comment or ask anything, come on over and join us in the Facebook group at untameyourself.com/Facebook. Thanks. Today, I say this all the time. I realize how spoiled I am. You know how often the podcast is like, and I've got another dear friend of mine. And I'm like, I am a lucky, lucky human. I've made a lot of good choices to be in the right place at the right time, to have so many phenomenal people in my life. And so this is Dr. Matt Kreinheder. Dr. Matt is local here in my community. I worked with him for like 8 months this year on his cool table twice a week, working his magic. He is a practitioner of network spiral analysis, and he's just brilliant, so brilliant. He's like so much more than that. We were geeking out before we got on, like, how do I describe you to people? And he's like, I'm a dude that does stuff, and it's just like the most nondescript description of anyone. Doesn't do it justice. He does so many amazing things, has such a brilliant mind. It's going to be such a fun conversation. We'll see what rabbit holes we want to dive down together. So, Dr. Matt, first question, what do you love about being a man?
Well, it's interesting. What I love now is definitely different than what I loved 6 months ago or 2 years ago. I'm in a phase now where I'm getting back into weightlifting and doing a lot more physical stuff. I love feeling powerful. I love being in my body, and I love the space that generates for me energetically, but also for my clients. And the more powerful I feel, the more I'm able to kind of mix between the masculine and the feminine modes that I'm in, because I'm in a healing space quite a bit. That's a very kind of a yin practice. It's a loving practice, gentle practice. I have to hold space a lot. So when I get into my car, I listen to hardcore heavy metal, and I go and lift weights and be a badass. And that's what helps me, feel like I'm staying in my masculine.
That's amazing. And so here's I'm also, in the last month and a half, have gotten back into working out consistently after literally 3 years of being very inconsistent with it. And just this morning, I was having this thought, like, how have I survived the last 3 years of my life without doing this?
Yeah. It's fascinating. And I think that there's something about being here in Southern California that kind of invites that a little bit more soft and yielding type of body practice. And I've found that as I've gotten into a little bit more physical practice, there's that energy that just kind of comes back that feels like it's radiating, and it's almost creating some separation between me and the way I perceive myself in the community and everyone else around me. So just a really interesting thing that I've been noticing.
Yeah, and I even noticed so many things that I've probably been leaning towards over-processing through like words, conversation, and emotions, just works its way right out of my body with the sweat, with the movement. And you know what? I really noticed that thing that so many people say, how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
I've really wanted to debunk that, and it's just true.
Damn it. Yeah, totally.
And I find there's few things like some kind of intense physical activity to really show you how you actually show up to everything in your life.
Yeah, I love that. And I also think that the amount of energy you approach any situation with shows you the complete irrelevancy of the problems that existed at the previous level of energy. So you go into the gym and you totally crank up your energy. You feel awesome. You feel empowered. You feel it in your body. You feel capable. And all of a sudden, the problems that you went in with just are ridiculous,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, I got that handled. Or the solution just pops into your head because you're in a totally different state that's much more empowered.
That's something that actually interrupts my workouts all the time, because as I'm moving and as I'm releasing and all this stuff, I'm like, crap, gotta write that down. Gotta write that down. I'm like the person who's always on my friggin' phone during my
Right.
workout, because I'm like, oh, but that idea, oh, that two pieces I was trying to get to connect. Finally, there it is, and I can't. And if I don't write things down, they will literally leave.
Yeah, they evaporate for sure.
I have a random question for you. It's really going to come out of left field. Do you wake up a lot in the middle of the night?
Not as much as I used to, and it's primarily because I'm underslept.
Okay.
I kind of run in the system hard the past few months, and I have a couple hours a night where I'll sleep 4 or 5 hours just because I'm up working or writing. When I've been in phases of my life where I'm really well fed and really well nourished in terms of sleep, then that doesn't really happen. I will often wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, sorry. That's a purely selfish question. It's been happening to me a lot lately. This like amazing hour between like 2 and 4 a.m. I have been finding, because I've been working out, because I've been eating better, and I sleep quite well, but that's a window for me where it's like no one else is awake. There's no like the field of other people's thoughts, much less interference. It's been like really like precious time for me lately.
Yeah. It's amazing that window of time, specifically in Chinese medicine. There's a time of the day where qi transits through each of the organs. So that time specifically is associated with the liver. And
interesting.
and as it transits between the liver and the lung, there's often a little bit of like an energetic hiccup because the liver's so intense and so kind of binding the energy, and the lung likes to be a little bit more relaxed. So sometimes people just kind of, they feel their liver activating, especially people who have, a lot of energy in their system. So might be something to look at there.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, so this is one of the things I love about you. You are so well studied in all things to do with like the mind, body, and spirit. So geek out with us for a second. What's the timeline? How did you actually get into? What was the first step on like the path you've gone down that's gotten you to like be who you are and what you do? And what are like the variety of things that you've studied?
First steps, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say steps because I think it's just kind of how I'm built. So I think it was probably naturally occurring from the time that I got here. I mean, I was always interested in the paranormal, always interested in psychic phenomena, that kind of stuff that was a little bit occultish, when I was growing up. And then I had my rebellion phase where I pushed against the Catholic upbringing that I was a part of, and started to look at more esoteric type information. And then I realized that was a pendulum swing. And really, I started to find kind of my home looking at Zen Buddhism, because it was the most comprehensive kind of map of the subjective experience of waking up that I had ever found. So I studied that for quite some time, and still it's a part of my practice. And then went through a period where I decided where I was going to go back to school and got my doctorate in chiropractic, a master's in acupuncture. That started to inform a lot of the way that I look at the human experience and look at the experience of how someone humans themselves through their neurology. And that informed a lot of kind of the scientific thinking. And most recently, I've been looking at a lot of integral theory and spiral dynamics, the work of Ken Wilber and tons of other people. And it really helps me give a meta framework for all of the different models that I've looked at. It's a theories theory, so it has a place really in it for any different type of theory or the way that you want to think about something. And it's been so useful to use that as a frame for understanding how consciousness evolves, because there's so many things that I found in my life that's like, this is right, and this is right, and this is right, but they all conflict.
Yeah.
And it was driving me crazy. And I realized that they're all right at different developmental levels, or they're all right from an internal sensory subjective experience or an external kind of scientific experience. And you have to have a way for them all to fit together. So I guess that's a kind of a loose trajectory through.
Yeah, but again, this is something I appreciate about you. I feel like you have a way of like asking a question or sharing an idea or a thought that really does help people tie pieces together that were previously floating around out there being like, well, I believe this and I believe that, but they don't really support each other. And so I know something that has been so enormously helpful that I'm like endlessly grateful to you for is navigating being in this like, quote, spiritual, conscious community where we live when there's a lot of people talking about a lot of things. And I'm, as you know, I'm a doer, I'm an action person. And I always want to know, okay, but then what, right? So we're hearing about someone's latest medicine journey or this healer that they worked with. And you put on this incredible workshop many months ago about integrating spiritual experiences. And I'd love to just geek out or just riff on that for a little while, because I think what I observe, and even in my own community, two different things. When people are going and having experiences, in a lot of cases, they're getting what I'll just describe as blown out, right? Maybe they've gone like too fast, too soon, or too much, or too deep, too fast, whatever. But then there's also when it's really heady. And it's the way I've been describing it lately is it's actually a mental indulgence disguised as a spiritual endeavor.
I love that.
So how do you, I mean, I know this is what you do day in and day out. You help people like recover from the things or integrate the things. What are the important pieces? Or however you want to answer that question in your genius way.
So yeah, the spiritual experience is a fascinating thing, and there's so many things to look at when that's occurring. The first thing is specificity of who this person is and how they're having an experience and how they're interpreting that, because so much of the spiritual experience is not the experience itself, but what do we do with it when it comes back through our brain, and how do we create meaning about it? I mean, two people can have a very similar experience, and one person is going to come back saying, oh my God, I'm Jesus. And another person is going to say, oh my God, I know what it's like to be at one with the universe. So it's really like, how do you help them piece through what their specific experience is? Another thing is, I think that a true spiritual experience is not just happening in the spirit if it's going to be useful. And I think use is like really, to me, one of the most important things about spiritual experiences is how do you keep it useful? And that is bring it from the spirit through the mind into the emotions and into the body. So how do we incorporate all of those realms? And, you know, I agree with you that most people are getting in this information, and especially spiritual information consumption. Yeah. They're really just like on a quest for novelty in their brain, and they're not embodying and not owning and not even really having spiritual experiences. They're having thoughts about spiritual ideas, and they think that they know lots of things. But, you know, in Buddhist studies, they really emphasize, get all that shit out of your head and just go sit on the mat, you know, and just commit to going beyond the mind, because the mind is the primary obstacle. So I get really skeptical when people know a lot and they talk a lot, but there's not a felt sense and not an embodiment. And how do you kind of transition beyond the ego? Because usually those are the people who are most likely to defend what they know. And how do you value them for their brilliance of what they've accumulated and say, there might also be something else to look at here. Yeah. And then you have the people who have had the big blowout experience. You know, they went to Burning Man, they did a Vipassana retreat, they did the medicine journey, whatever it is. And how do you take what was a brand new contextual experience and start to integrate that back down into their life? And what I like to tell people is that, you know, the experience is a moment in time, and to try to maintain that state is ridiculous. There's not really any historical religious spiritual figure that I know who has in their body stayed in those heavenly states. It's not how it works. And they try to model their life on that state, and it creates so much chaos.
Oh my God. It's okay, great. We have to pause and really re-emphasize that, right? Because I think I was actually thinking this while you were saying that it's like a form of PTSD, except I don't think it's like the S is like spiritual or like PTED, like post-traumatic enlightening disorder, where someone has that, and that's the thing. I've seen people go into like a deep depression almost,
Yeah.
that they can't get back to that place.
Yes.
But that place, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're not meant to get back to it.
No one's meant to live there. We are born, from my perspective and what I've read, I'll let everyone kind of take this into the laboratory of their own experiencing and decide if whether that's true for them or not. But from my perspective, you're born into a human body and you have spiritual experiences to remind you of the truth of what your soul is and what you're connected to, meaning spirit. But then you're meant to come back and help people. Help other people remember who they are. And if you're just hanging out up here in this place all the time, it's really hard to be helping people. And usually when people want to be hanging out in that purely spiritual state, what they really want to be doing is avoiding the pain that they're having in their everyday life. And that is not at all a truly integrated experience.
And that's what, I mean, we've had, it's in the book. I did an interview recently with my friend Jen Blackstock where we talked about spiritual bypass, and like people went nuts over that in all directions. People were so triggered. People were so like, oh my God, this is what I've been doing. And like, one of the things we talked about is that's actually, it's kind of part of the gig, right?
Totally.
We all do it. We all have those moments. And I think to always just be aware, you mentioned something about a pendulum swing. Your languaging, the two things you said that I say all the time, these pendulum swings and the usefulness, right? Yeah. It's like, and actually, for people who are listening, I made this pendulum swing motion with my hand, and then I kind of cut down the center. That's where I actually believe the usefulness lies, in like the line where the pendulum comes back into the center. Like, I really see that as like the juicy, like the sweet spot where you get to integrate, you get to embody, and the experiences do mean something because you're doing something with it. It's not just like another notch in your belt of like, I went to Peru and then I went and I sat in this sacred spot, which like, you guys, I'm not knocking that because like I love doing that. As we record this in 3 days, I'm about to go to Barcelona and we're going to go through the south of France. And part of why we're going to the south of France is because I want to go sit in places where Mary Magdalene supposedly was centuries ago.
Yes.
And I just want to sit there. I just want to sit there and I just want to feel it. And like you said, maybe see, is there a piece of me, a part of my truth or who I am or my evolution that I might pick up here?
Yep. Totally.
But then not have to identify with it and lament when I get back to San Diego that I'm not in the south of France, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree. And I love that pendulum analogy. And also, for me, I'm thinking about like, so if we're looking at the pendulum this way, you can also look at it this way, moving through time, right?
Yeah.
So as you add in more energies, there's going to be different parts of the pendulum swinging. And if you can keep that nice through line of usefulness and service. Service is the thing to me. You know, that's kind of the expression of the spiritual journey is what are you doing to help people now that you know something about it? And I was having this conversation with Michael a couple months ago that, and this thing just kind of popped out of my mouth that service is infinitely scalable joy. Because it's not just the joy that you get to have, but you get everyone else's vicarious joy. And if you really want to be happy, taking care of people is how you do it.
Yeah, but again, there's a pendulum on the spectrum of taking care of people. There's the put everyone else's needs first, put myself last, have no boundaries, and deny myself all the time. And actually, what's the sweet spot of that? So where do people land on that? How do people find that sweet spot in your world?
You have to consider yourself one of the people. So when you take care of people, you have to be a people.
Yeah.
And
you have to be one of those people.
That's right. So, awesome. You know, the highest and best is when all needs are mutually met and when you're evolving. And if you're running your tank dry, then evolution just simply doesn't happen. And it's fascinating when I have seen historically women in the office who have fibromyalgia. The question that I always ask them is, where do you fall on your list? And they say, wait, I can be on my list? Like, it's the kids, it's work, it's my husband, it's my mom, my dogs, and then maybe me, and maybe not, I don't know. You know, they just don't take care of themselves, and there's not enough energy in their system to even run their own body. So just fascinating thing that I see all the time with people with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, that kind of stuff.
And so, and for people who are like, they're busy, like life in the year 2016, it's just complex.
Yep.
I think we make ourselves busier than we need to be. And this is kind of, it's not different. I think really part of the complexity is that there's so much choice. There's so many options. Like, I don't remember where I was. It was like a couple months ago, a coffee shop or something. And I was basically listening to a woman describe like a 6 or 7 year old schedule. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I played sports growing up, and it was like, other than practice and stuff, my schedule was comprised of what book am I reading? What are the handful of TV shows I watch? What game am I playing? How long can I ride my bike for before I have to come in for dinner? And this freaking 6-year-old needs a personal assistant to keep track of all of his appointments.
It's madness. It's madness. Yeah, I think we're convinced that more is more, and that the more we do, the more prepared we're going to be, especially with kids. You know, the idea that you can make them smarter faster, or you can make them better at sports faster. It's like there's no appreciation for the natural rhythm and development of who they have to be. And from an integrated perspective, you know, usually they look at just academics or just sports, and there's not like what's the quality of your human that you're raising. Yeah. So I agree, madness.
And I've met I have 2 people that stick out in my mind who I've known over the last decade. Brilliant and so socially underdeveloped. I mean, and the emotional turmoil that comes from not being able to have a conversation with someone, or like making people so uncomfortable, like, and thinking there's something wrong with you when there's not. It's literally just like your training is super lopsided. It's like, I'm so smart, or I've just practiced, I'm an expert at paintball, or like something, or like I could kick your ass, but I literally can't have a conversation with a human.
Yep. So I totally agree. And maybe there is some sort of metric out there that exists that just looks at and measures the quality of a being, just like the quality of someone that you want to spend time with. Maybe it's interpersonal relating, you know, that line of development, but we measure intelligence through the IQ. We measure, you know, sports capability through how many goals you score. But isn't it like when you get into the middle of your life, just the people that you want to be around, aren't those the people that you value the most? Totally. You're like, wouldn't it be cool if we could measure that?
Yeah. And I actually and you and I have connected on this because we're originally from the East Coast. I think I love being an East Coaster that lives in California.
Yeah, it's a whole thing, isn't it?
Because like I appreciate you because I actually understand what you're saying. And you can do it in using few words. Right?
Yeah,
You know, and I'm poking a little bit of fun at these things, but most people listening to the show, I actually checked the stats recently, and my largest volume of listeners are in California and in New York. I mean, there's plenty of people in between. I realize we're downloaded in 177 countries. That was cool. I had no idea. But so a lot of people can like relate, and some people can't. But you want to be able to understand and integrate and like take things in and participate with people.
Yeah. And I think we have probably seen it on like an East Coast, West Coast perspective, because that's the experience that we've had. But I would bet it's pretty uniform in consciousness in spiritual communities across the world. Yeah. And I think you recently interviewed JP Sears, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that thing. That's kind of like the flowery, the flowy language, the kind of a little bit nebulous way of looking at things and speaking about things, that it's just a part of the consciousness that exists in certain lines of development or levels of development as people are going through their consciousness journey.
Yeah, and I think partly I see people don't want to offend anyone and they don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
So staying in the nebulous actually prevents you from actually having to get uncomfortable.
Totally.
It's kind of a way of hiding in plain sight. Because you get to show up and it looks like you're engaging, but you're doing it in a way that doesn't really risk anything.
Totally. Yeah, there's no taking a stand.
Yeah. And then the thing is this, I think I'm growing and changing. Like when I asked you the question, what do you love about being a man? You're like, well, what I love now is different from like 6 months ago, a year, 2 years ago. And it's like, I just say this all the time. I reserve the right to change my mind. Like I might be a totally different human a month from now. I cringe. Sometimes I go back and I'll listen to something or someone will quote something back to me that I said, or an old blog post will resurface and I'm like, damn, I thought that.
Yeah.
But to me, in terms of like evolution or consciousness or whatever, that's kind of the goal. I should cringe.
Totally, totally. And it's fascinating if you start to use that lens of looking at your evolution and looking the way that like a philosopher is looked at through the canon of his work. I mentioned I've been looking at a lot of Ken Wilber stuff recently, and there's different phases of his development. They call Wilber 1, Wilber 2, 3, 4, and 5 that just are fundamental shifts in the way that he understood how everything exists. And I think that when we have this desire to be the most accurate versions of who we are, and it gets a little bit neurotic sometimes.
Yeah.
And, I find that for myself as well. And when we just, exactly like you said, give ourselves the permission to be a work in progress, I think it makes everything a whole lot easier.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to go back to, you were saying the mind is the biggest obstacle, and I super agree with this. So like you and I have talked about this, and I know you work with a lot of people around being empathic, and I know you're super empathic yourself. And, there's something in the last couple months that I have been trying on and experimenting with, which is to the extent that I identify with something is going to be the extent it actually impacts me. So I decided, I don't even think I told you this kind of experiment that I've been doing, that I'm no longer going to identify as an empath. I don't call myself that. I don't say I'm that. I don't think about myself. I know I'm sensitive. I'm sensitive to things or whatever, and it might just be a languaging choice, but I've decided that because one of the things that, I was dealing with was feeling other people's stuff in my physical body. Right. And for a little while, I allowed myself to be like a little spiritually special about it. Like, oh yeah, like I can feel my clients, what's going on with them an hour before we get on the phone. And then I realized, yeah, but if my body is constantly feeling discomfort, that is not mine. I don't necessarily know that that's useful because my body doesn't know the difference, that that's mine or that it's not. Right. So physiologically, hormonally, in my nervous system, I'm still reacting to these things. And I got to tell you, it's been working.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And in the same way that these special labels, whether it's empathic or it's psychic or whatever it is, they have the same function as a diagnosis. They start to generate a part of a persona. So this persona has kind of a through line of who you consider yourself to be. So if I consider myself to be an empath, then I'm always on the lookout for why these feelings that are happening in my body aren't mine. And that's disempowering. Who needs that? And I think that there's a little bit of avoidance that's possible. And one of the things I love sharing with people is that if you are empathic, if you are sensitive to the things that are happening around you, that's happening because these things are coming in and triggering stuff that's unresolved inside of you for you. 9 times out of the 10, that's what's happening more often than you're actually picking up someone else's raw data. Right. It's usually just triggering your own stuff. So, I like the idea of looking at an empathic tendency as just a super special skill set of how to clean up your own stuff. I think it's really valuable that way. And I also have the belief that as we climb in levels of consciousness, we become more responsible. So could it be possible that an empathic tendency is actually an ability that's been given to you because you've decided to be helpful to more people than just yourself? So you get to feel more than just yourself. And if you're going to make that mean something about just you, then you're pushing that gift away. And are you really willing to take responsibility for being helpful for your friends, your family, your clients, whatever it is? And I'm not saying that to you specifically, just in general. How can we use this as a capability to just hold a space? And then also, just like you're saying, turn it off. Go take a walk on the beach. It doesn't need to be a thing that's constantly muddying the waters.
Yeah. Oh, and something else I appreciate about you. I remember asking you once what you do at the end of the day. So how many people do you see on any given day, average?
Depending on the day and whether it's coaching clients or clients in the office, could be anywhere from, 5 to 25.
Yeah. So you're seeing, because if any of you have never done NSA before, actually, when you go into Dr. Matt's office, there's 4 different beds. Or you call them beds or tables?
Tables.
There's 4 beds in my office. See you later.
Forget about it.
Yeah. So you're seeing a ton of people. And so I remember asking you, how do you manage all this energy? What do you do at the end of the day? And I remember you answered me, and maybe it's different now, but you're basically like, I just kind of just sit around, chill for a little bit, and then I go home. And
Yeah.
because I also think sometimes people think they need all these elaborate things. Now, me personally, like I take salt baths, I do cord cutting, like I ground myself a lot. That works for me and that resonates. And like you said something similar earlier, I'm always, one of the reasons why we even have the podcast and have the conversations is so someone can go, that doesn't work for me, but that might. Let me try this thing out and see. Or that thing that was working for me isn't anymore. Maybe I'll try that on. So is that still kind of like your process? The end of the day comes and you're like, let me just chill, be in silence and be with myself for a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say it's even less formal than that. It's like, by the time the end of the day comes, it's like, okay, spent those units of energy. That's done.
Boom.
Now what?
Yeah.
And here we go. And I love the idea of having a ritual for people who need a ritual. And maybe I'll find that I'm kidding myself and I really do need a ritual. But at this point, it's just kind of like, okay, I help people. And now I'm not helping people, and let's go eat some food.
Yeah.
And I also think that part of that is a real willingness to let everyone be in their own stuff and really willing to let them suffer. And even the thing that used to catch me is I wish I could have helped that person more today. And I just more and more own that everyone is on their own kind of trajectory of their process. And sometimes they leave and they're feeling better. Sometimes they leave and they're feeling worse. But over time, I know that they're heading in a direction that's going to be much better.
And this is why I think it's important to circle back a little bit, that like not being so attached to like one-time isolated experiences.
Totally. Yeah.
Because when it's actually part of a longer term, of a bigger picture. And I learned this through my work with you. I've been learning this through my work with Siobhan, and I've been seeing it play out with my clients as well. I have clients, and I know you do too, who work with me for really long term now. I'll start people at 6 months, and they'll do another 6 months, and they'll do another. Like I've had clients at this point who have been with me. In some cases, it's on and off, but like 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, and it's like we're just unwinding. A lot of stuff is so deep in like impacted, right?
Yeah.
What do they call that when your wisdom teeth? It's like, and it's like, God, you got to get up in there and really undo all the stuff. And like at the depth of the level of work that we're doing with people, I think sometimes that stuff is impacted.
Totally.
And we're unwinding, and our culture very much has conditioned us to be like, I want it now. And I think that's why people swing the pendulum. Well, let me go do ayahuasca. And I'm not picking on ayahuasca. It's just like top of mind because we know so many people have done that. And it's like, great. And then for 3 days, you feel like you've let this lifelong thing go. And then 2 weeks later, it triggers you again, and you're like, shit, it's still there.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. And I have to remind my clients sometimes, like, okay, so you've been dealing with this for 2 decades, and we've been working together for about 3 months. So, like, how are you feeling that you should be done with this already if this has just been hanging out in your system literally for 20 years? And they're like, oh, yeah, I've been wiring this neurology in this certain way. I've been making these connections for 20 years, and now we're trying to break those habits and bring it into a new path. It's a big deal.
Yeah. And it's okay. It's okay that it takes some time, right? I see people beating themselves up, which that just interrupts the process.
Yeah. And we are an instant gratification society, and we think that we can make things better by taking the red pill or taking the most powerful pill or, whatever it is that's just going to blast us out. But at any level of sustainable integration needs the structure to go with it. And what I've seen oftentimes for people who take ayahuasca, and again, I think it's probably a great medicine for the right person at the right time, is they get that massive blast of energy, but nothing in their life supports them staying at that level of energy. Totally. There's no structural integration. So how do you have both? And the other thing that makes me wild about ayahuasca is, and all these kind of culturally derived experiences, is they existed in a culture. They had the entire support of a village or a community or the songs or the whatever it is. It's not just the drug that you can extract out and expect it to have the same process. Taking ayahuasca or anything else was probably part of a rite of passage experience that was a year, 2 years, 3 years in a cycle of making.
Yeah, and I thank you for saying that, because I'm remembering something you said that was huge during that workshop, which was because it was part of a culture. When you came out of the experience, you went back into a community of people, many of whom had done it and had the experience and basically knew that you were not going to be the same, or that maybe you were going to be a little off and different for a while as you kind of reintegrated everything. and it was okay, and it wasn't taboo, or it wasn't wrong, or you couldn't not talk about it openly or with only certain people. Whereas, right, people are uprooting their lives, leaving like they're just kind of normal, standard American, whatever it is, where you work, what you do, your family, whatever, doing this thing, having this experience, and then having to go back on Monday to a group of people who may or may not have had the experience you had. And
Totally.
maybe you could talk about it, maybe you can't. Like, that is, to me, it reads almost as like self-violent, that you would pop out, do this really intense thing, and then pop right back in to the environment that kind of created the whole reason you needed to do the really intense thing to begin
with. We are an amazing species.
Amazing. And then I think we're just so hard on ourselves, you know?
Yeah. I agree. And, you know, I think we both know people for whom that experience has been magical and powerful.
Yes.
And really life-changing. And I don't want to belittle that.
No.
And also, I think we know a lot of people who have believed that it would be, and then they got back and it was really challenging. Yeah. So the integration, it's kind of critical.
And again, I mean, we're talking about plant medicine here, but this could be a certain type of therapy.
Totally.
This could be a retreat. This could be that you're engaging in a new form of meditation.
Yeah.
We're talking about anything that's increasing, expanding, or impacting your awareness, your consciousness, like your access to your emotions, and this is like a spectrum of experiences here. We're just using the ayahuasca as an example.
Yep.
Oh, God, this is so fun. What's up, Wild Ones? Quick break in the episode to invite you to a free training I'm doing the whole month of November. It's happening November 7th, November 14th, November 21st, and November 28th. So there will be 4 live training sessions. It's called Unconsume Yourself, and the premise is this: more is not always better. So this 4-week training is a life detox designed to help you hack away at the unessential. I'm going to help you declutter all areas of your life: mental, physical, emotional, digital, and more, so that you can go into 2017 with more energy and focus to put towards what truly matters to you. This is about sifting through the noise and the distractions so you can really focus, and you can clean up your attitude, your thoughts, your language, and take more focused and more appropriate action to actually move you towards the things you want in your life. So if that sounds good to you, you can register at untameyourself.com/unconsume, which is UNCONSUME. So again, register for free at untameyourself.com/unconsume. All of the trainings are recorded. So whether you're catching this before we start on November 7th, or you're catching this later on in November before we finish, you can register at any time and you'll still be able to get access to all of the recordings. Cool? Back to the show. So let's jam on boundaries for a little bit, because my people are insatiable when it comes to boundaries.
Yes.
Energetic and otherwise. But I know you are... you probably wouldn't say this about yourself, but I will say it for you. Pretty masterful around energetic boundaries.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So that said, no pressure. But you better wow us with whatever's the next thing you say.
You better deliver it.
That said, give us the keys to the... Now, where do people mess this up? Let's start there.
They get caught in the should. They get caught in believing that there's a role that they have to fill, that there's a certain way that they're supposed to show up. I think for women especially, they don't trust their intuition. I think a lot of times for people who are on the spiritual path, they get opened up to perceiving something, and they think because it's spiritual, that means that they can open the floodgates and just let all the boundaries down. And that's not at all what that means. One of my favorite kind of touchstone phrases for this is, you probably know it, is Danielle Laporte, who says, "Wide open heart, big fucking fence." And I think that's huge for the spiritual boundary. It's just like, okay, I'm open and aware to so much that's going on, but it doesn't mean that I have to be in love with every single human being. It doesn't mean I have to be in contact and connection. I mean, for me, for my style, I keep really close boundaries. They're really kind of tight and very super defined. And it's taken some cultivation. So I think the kind of testing of what feels amazing is really critical. I think believing in the fact that you're experiencing energetic things and the fact that it's uncomfortable actually means something, and that there's actually a truth to that. I also see people kind of negate that there's something important going on because they're having all these physical sensations. Believe in that shit. And I think there's just a mix of all that stuff that has to be figured out as you go.
So I know you also work with people. You work in the mind, in the physical body, in the emotional body. You talk about spirit.
Mm.
I've also been something I've been noticing for a while, and I like to just sit back and watch patterns. I don't want to assume things. I don't want to judge things. I don't need to draw theories, especially when it's not in a large enough sample of people, right?
Totally.
So, but I have been noticing, and I have a rolling theory that I'm observing, that actually one of the overindulgences of the self-help personal development world is, and this is going to sound really contradictory for me, so I need to give it context, is actually overindulging our feelings.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Overindulging the feelings. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that there is a part of the development in which the mind has been supreme. The rational, cognitive has been the most important thing. And our culture, our society really values that the most. Mm-hmm. And so we have an identity that's built around how smart we are or how well we can process, how quick-witted we are. And at some point we break through that into the emotional sensitive self. And we want to have all those feelings and emotion be present. And we need to let them up. We need to let them move through. And we need to let them, finally have a voice. And then there's another part of the maturation where they're both equally important, but forward movement actually comes from slowing down that emotional process that actually takes more time and just saying, oh, I'm feeling really sad right now. And now what?
Yeah.
I'm really heated right now. I'm really pissed off. And now what? Okay, this is the direction we're heading. And I'm actually going to use all that as fuel for driving me forward. And it doesn't have to be a thing that I just sit and manage and process and figure out and work through. All three of those are really critical parts of the process. And we need to understand what's appropriate in the moment and how to use the right tool for the right moment.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, man, I just look at, again, one of those like things where you cringe, and I'm like, I perceive it as a waste of time. Mm-hmm. At the time I didn't, though. Just like, I just need to sit with it. I just need to be with it. I just need to feel it. And yeah, but like what you said, it's like, cool. Now what?
Yeah.
And also let me get used to being able to feel something, but continue to put one foot in front of the other.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think one of the things that feels really valuable to share here is that if we're looking at these at developmental levels, again, I'm thinking about integral theory, that most of the people in the world are actually merging out of that rational and moving towards the emotional. So the vast majority, just in terms of percentage of people, need to have that permission to feel the emotion.
Yeah.
And it's percentage-wise a smaller number of people who are transitioning beyond that into a more integral level of, okay, now I'm going to do mind. Okay, now I'm going to do body. Okay, now I'm going to do spirit, and having, just kind of the right thing for the right moment. So yes, let's have all of those be accurate. And yeah, for the people who are ready to transition, there's not a lot of people who are saying the things that you're saying. So they really, really need to hear that it's okay not to be wallowing in your emotions all the time, that you can transition beyond that. So thank you for sharing all those perspectives, because we need that.
Yeah. And again, it's like those pendulum swings and that fine line somewhere in the middle, no matter what is the direction of the swing, there's a difference between feeling and acknowledging something and wallowing in it.
Totally. Yeah. And even when it's productive, there's a couple people who come to mind who are seeking getting through pain because they think that through pain is where they get to value. So
Yeah.
every time something comes up that they need to transform, they find the pain and they try to go into that. That's one way, and it's super inefficient.
Yeah.
There's also just choosing what you want and chasing that because it's of service to you and other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something, thank you for using the word inefficient. Like for me, I do. And I know some people listening, maybe you're not connected with like your purpose or your calling or your work in the world. But I like to remind people all the time that, you said service is infinitely scalable joy.
Yeah.
Your service does not, not you being Dr. Matt, but anyone listening, doesn't have to look like what Dr. Matt does. It doesn't have to look like what I do. You don't have to be impacting hundreds or thousands or millions of people to make a difference. It could literally be that like you raise your kids to not be assholes.
Please,
right?
more of that. Yes.
More of that. Or like you actually do take care of yourself and put yourself first, and your kid grows up knowing that that's okay and important.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Or, the way you show up in relationship, like you're a woman, I'll just use context for the show. You've read Alison Armstrong stuff. You've listened to me talk about this, and you just don't emasculate men anymore, right? Like that is a service to everyone around you. Because like we're all, whether we want to own it or not, we're all role models because people are watching us and interacting with us 24/7.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally love that. And I have this kind of vision that everyone's highest level of service is based on what I call the shape of their soul. So there's like a specific configuration of how we're put together. So my service is never going to look like your service. Your service is never going to look exactly like Alison Armstrong. And yes, we can have role models. Yes, we can have people that we look up to. But the truest level of energetic congruence is going to come from knowing specifically what lights up this beingness that you happen to be inhabiting in this lifetime. So I think that, raising an amazing family, if it's the truth of who you're meant to be, is just as big of a service as having a podcast, writing books, all of these things that we do. I think it's huge.
Yeah, big time. So anything else about boundaries? Did we hit all the points on that?
I don't know. Ask me a specific question.
You got it. I love it. When Dr. Matt runs workshops, he'll just stop in the middle and be like, okay, who has a question? And then he just goes on an amazing magical mystery tour. Let's talk about boundaries and service. Let's combine the two things because, again, it's that desire to give. I think most humans, we just want to help at our core.
Totally.
And then again, when we talk about, the shadows, gift, enlightened state, if you want to use like the Gene Keys terminology, the shadow of that is we become self-sacrificing. And we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but in terms of once you do find, whether it's with your kids or in your business or what you do, or maybe some volunteer work, why and how do people establish boundaries there?
Yeah, I think there's two types of boundaries that are really critical to pay attention to. One is based on your time and your own energy and how much you're able to give. And for me, and probably for you and other people who are in this type of work, we have a specific container, so there's something valuable about having a container. And I also really like pushing the edges of that container because I love growth. Yeah. So I always like to like overwork myself a little bit and just see what the next level of that evolution looks like. Yeah. It's a little bit more of a masculine thing to do probably. But I love doing that. The other thing to pay attention to, especially when you're in more, I would say, challenging situations where you're doing social work or you're doing community service, that kind of stuff, is when you interact with people who will just take everything that you have to give because they have nothing for themselves. So how do you have both compassion and an energetic boundary for those people who are so just broken and just need so much help? And how do you see yourself as a loving human being when you have to say, no, I'm done? And I think it's a really critical thing to just be able to say, I'm so glad to have this time with you today. So glad to be able to help. And now I'm going, and not give yourself into a black hole. I found this for me when I was serving in my career early on, that there was a few people who would just take forever to tell me all their problems. And when the next set of people would come in, I was toast. I had nothing to give. And I felt like if I pulled away from not listening to their story, that I wasn't helping. But I realized if I had 100 units of energy, arbitrary units of energy in a day, and I gave them 30, because their story about how disempowered they were was so strong. But at the end of the day, my last clients weren't getting as much. So I think that there's, again, a mix of compassion and willingness to say, I love you and I'm done. That's really critical.
Yeah. Or even if it's like, I'm done for good or I'm done for now.
Yeah. Both.
And I've certainly dealt with that with clients or in relationships and stuff like that. And I realized, man, this is one of those things that we talked about in my interview with Jen Blackstock. She was saying, growth, these things, it's like a spiral staircase. And sometimes you're spiraling down, sometimes you're spiraling up. But either way, because the nature of it being a spiral, that is, you are going to come back around. You are going to revisit some of the stuff. You're going to see it again. You're going to see it in a different light. You're going to see it from a different perspective. But you're going to see it again. So something I've been seeing over and over and over again for the last couple years is the idea of allowing other people to have their own experience. And like, yeah, I can come in and help, and then I need to get out. I need to help you do your own thing. But when my desire to contribute is actually my desire, like I need validation through that I have contributed. Totally. That's when I'm actually not helping. Because I'm not helping, it's not a pure form of help or service, because I'm helping you to feel good within or about me, but I might be over helping or over giving or like the it's funny, it comes from the Bible, but giving pearls to swine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's critical. And I realized for me there was a major shift in how I was able to help people when I pulled back from watching someone in suffering and just said, oh, they're suffering. Oh, thank God. They're just suffering. That's all. I know it's so convincing and it looks like something I have to take care of. But I think about all the times in my life that I suffered and the amazing things that led to and the new perspective and the new energy that came from that. It's like, oh, cool. They're just doing the suffering part of the journey. And I don't need to fix that. I don't need to make that better.
Yeah. But I think, some people listening to that are probably like, no one should suffer.
Well, let them try to fix everyone. We'll see what happens.
Then we'll see who's suffering.
That's so good.
Man. So, all right. I'm excited to ask you this question. You and I, as much as like we connect and we can really go deep and have these conversations, which for me are really fun. We're very different. We're very different humans.
Totally.
And so the idea of untaming yourself is really at its core. It sounds like barefoot, naked, screaming in the woods. And that's not what it's about. It's really just coming home to your true nature and honoring yourself, right? Honoring yourself in a world that really wants you to just follow its rules. So how, in the last decade or whatever is the time period, have you come into untaming yourself? Or how do you do it?
I think the most important thing that I've come to realize is that I don't need to talk and I don't need to participate and I don't need to interact with other people, especially in social situations. I'm such a massive introvert. And if you're a fan of human design, I'm a projector. And I often have what people consider to be powerful things to say. And when I just try to blurt it out there so I can be a part of the conversation, it's a mess. And I get all wound up. And my true nature is that when spirit evokes an interaction, that's when the brilliance moves through. So even in like when I'm asked to speak, the past half dozen times, I haven't really prepared anything. Yeah. I've just come through to the moment of saying, what are we going to say? Okay, here we go. And just letting that come through and just giving myself the permission to be a private human being in plain sight and not have to talk or interact or, really needing to do something or say something until spirit demands that something must come forward.
I appreciate that about you so much and have taken that as full-fledged permission to be a bit more like that myself. And that's something that has helped me not overgive as much as I have in the past. And I love watching you do it. And I love being the recipient of it. So let's end on this. This is fun. You like to describe people as weapons.
I do.
Listen, it stuck with me once. And it describes what you just said. Like, you'll sit back, you'll wait, you'll listen, and then when it's time to say something, you're like the katana, right? Like you'll just slice through. And you described me as more like Thor's hammer. Do you remember that or no?
Vaguely.
It was so great. So, but here's the question. It's not even about what weapon type we're going to create. You guys can keep an eye out for our upcoming online quiz. What weapon are you? We're not going to do that. But what's even the point? Personality tests, human design, typology, astrology, all these things. How can they be useful rather than distracting and overwhelming?
Totally. I think, do you want the mental or the metaphysical answer?
Do you have time for both?
Yes. So the mental answer is that just knowing yourself better is infinitely valuable if you can kind of shorten the learning curve on how you do things well. I think that's just a sweet hack. And I would say take most of that with a grain of salt, because anytime you have a system that is universally applicable, it's often specifically challenging. So there's nuances of these specific tests where I try it on and I'm like, no, this is just not accurate. Yeah. So that's the mental answer. Is like, let's just shortcut the learning curve. The metaphysical answer is that I think that there's, I know that there is, from my subjective experience, patterns of how the universe is put together. And if we can understand kind of the patterns of how we're put together, then we start to see kind of a meta vision of who we are. And one of the ways that I did this was I took as many personality tests as I could, and I probably have, 6, 8, 10 or a dozen tests that I just kind of looked for similarities. Yeah. And then just watching that pattern, just like you do, and saying, oh, so there's a fundamental quality that all of these metrics seem to be talking about that seems to be accurate, and I feel it from a personal sense of just inherently me. And when I can see that, then I'm starting to point this towards who am I? What is my soul here to do in this lifetime? And then we're getting into some really interesting stuff. There was a deep dive that I did for like 9 months on what's my soul's purpose. And that was one of the lenses that I looked at of really just understanding how it was put together.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for that. Didn't you, I keep saying this is the last thing, but this just really will. I believe I heard you speak somewhere at some point. Wasn't part of that deep dive, that 9-month thing. There was a journaling or something. You were waking up and writing what was present in your mind, or what was that little practice?
So it was more of a kind of a peak experience where I had spent like a 9-month deep dive. I was in so much pain about what I was going to do professionally, because as a chiropractor, I don't really fit into that mold, but I didn't want to forsake all the amazing things that I get to do in the office just to go into coaching. And so I was like, I don't really know who I am or what I'm here to do. And it was really painful. So I said, okay, let's figure it out. So this 9-month deep dive was just journaling and writing and taking tests and looking for trends and looking for patterns. And I filled probably 3 or 4 moleskin notebooks of just like figuring all this stuff out and testing stuff and trying it on. And at some point at the end of the line, I got to this moment of saying, I think I got it. I wrote it down in my journal, and I went to bed saying, hey, if you're up there, I think you are. I think I've got this. If I'm not accurate, just let me know. And I went to bed. I had this amazing dream that we won't need to go into detail on unless you ask me to, then I'll be happy to. But I woke up saying the words, I hear their soul's call, and I set them on their path. And I was just saying them out loud. I didn't know what was happening. And I woke up hearing myself saying it, and I wrote it down and I read it, and I was like, oh shit. Like, wow, like that's what I'm built for. Like that's the whole thing. And now everything that I think that I'm going to do professionally or even personally, I test it against that metric. And if it works, then I'm open to being a yes. If it doesn't work, then, it just doesn't work. And I don't need to lament that it's something that I can't do.
I love that. I love it so much. What is your website? Where can people, and again, I know you don't really operate too much from the interwebs, but tell them your website anyway, because that's what we do on podcasts.
www.untitled drmattk.com, drmattk.com. Pretty simple.
Yeah. And if you're, I know you do coaching, and if you're in the Encinitas area ever, Dr. Matt has his office. I recommend getting in the presence of this human, one of my favorite people for sure. So thank you so much. For those of you listening, this for sure is one of those episodes. Listen to it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. You're going to get something else or different or deeper from it. This is one of those. It's a savorer, as I like to call them. If you have questions, come on into the Facebook group, untameyourself.com/Facebook. Dr. Matt, thank you so much. Just as amazing as I thought it was going to be. Thank you for delivering.
Thank you so much. And thank you for choosing to be a human this time around in the same time space that I am. I appreciate you so much.
Talk to you later.
All right, bye.
So again, on my call this morning, I said, what's your excuse? You know, what is your excuse for why you're not allowed to have money? And the excuses came through like, I'm an introvert. I'm black. I can't do it. I am too young. I'm too old. I'm sick. I'm tired. I've got kids. One person was like, I'm pregnant. I'm so tired. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not skinny enough. That came up so much. People are like, I'm too fat. I'm too fat to be rich. And we've got all these excuses, right? And this is what I said to those people. I said, first of all, find someone who's done it in your skin or in your flavor or whatever. And if you can't find one, guess what? That's your job.